There are truths that official history keeps under lock and key. Secrets kept beneath tons of sand and centuries of oblivion. What would you do if you discovered that the foundation of the Egyptian pantheon, its most feared and venerated gods, was stolen from an older, deeper, and dangerously silent civilization? This is the forbidden revelation. We will descend the Nile, against the tide of time, to find the true cradle of Kemet. You will meet the Queen Mothers of Kush, the stellar rituals of the Dogon people, and the masters of Meroë, whose ancestral wisdom forged the royalty, the magic, and the gods that the world calls Ra, Anubis, and Isis. A story that reclaims the authority of Mother Africa and changes everything you've learned. It's time to open your eyes. If you seek the hidden truth that defines identity and spirituality, click the subscribe button, activate the bell, and tell us, are you ready to pierce the veil of forgetfulness? The journey begins where the Nile bends, in Kush. Long before Egypt erected its great pyramids in the sand, the cradle of civilization already pulsed with life and gold, upriver, in the forgotten lands of Kush, ancient Nubia. It was there, where the Nile bends most strongly, that the first concepts of divine kingship and sacred knowledge flourished under a sun of greater brilliance and a spirituality untouched by the outside world. However, the history written on papyri and in today's schools seems to have washed away this truth, leaving the south in the shadows, as if the source of the great river mattered no more than its delta. The mystery hidden beneath the sands of Meroë is that of a lineage of kings and queens, wise in the stars and in architecture, whose practices laid the foundation for everything the world would come to admire in Kemet. The symbolic journey of the Kushites was never about conquest through war, but rather conquest through knowledge. They were the guardians of the continent's living libraries, the masters who taught the first pharaohs about the correct ritual and the cosmic order of Ma'at. Their temples, made of dark stone, were not only dwellings for the gods, but portals where the ancestral power of Africa manifested itself in its purest form. This spiritual unfolding echoes to this day in every temple we admire in Egypt, for it is the spirit of Kush that gave them their soul. It is their primordial faith, their respect for water and land, that allowed knowledge to become power and kings to become gods, in a sacred dance of mysticism and politics that spanned millennia. When we look at Egypt, the truth whispers to us. We are not looking at the beginning but at a later chapter. The true secret of the Nile's glory lies upstream, patiently waiting for the next mystery, the Temple of Ammonius, to reveal the depth of its influence. Meroë. The name resonates with the silenced roar of power. This city, the vibrant capital of the Kingdom of Kush for centuries, was not merely a center of iron and gold trade. It was a colossal sanctuary dedicated to the warrior god, the Lion, Apedemak. His cult was at the heart of Meroitic identity, a reflection of the indomitable strength of the savannah and royal power that did not bend even to the neighboring empires of the north. Apedemak, depicted as a man with a lion's head or a pure lion, carried with him a profound mystery, the duality between the ferocity of war and the wisdom of leadership. His legends speak of a god who protected the rivers, controlled the waters, and ensured the harvests, showing a forbidden connection between military power and the fertility of the land. The symbolic journey of Apedemak, however, is the shadow that precedes Egypt. The image of the lion as a divine, fierce, and regal guardian is an echo of older cults that would culminate in the Sphinx and Egyptian leonine deities, such as Sekhmet. This cultural transfer suggests that Egypt, in absorbing the Meroitic deity, domesticated its original African ferocity to suit its own narrative. The spiritual unfolding of this deity is visible in the temples of Meroë, where Apedemak is frequently associated with the concept of victory and rebirth. He personifies the eternal cycle of nature, ensuring that power, even if it seems dormant, will always resurface, like the lion resting before the final hunt, imbued with unquestionable authority. This forbidden connection between Meroë and Egypt, between Apedemak and Sekhmet or the Sphinx, is a hook that official history has tried to cut. But the roar of Apedemak still echoes, reminding us that the power and mystery that Egypt absorbed, and which we now call its own, were born in the south, where knowledge of divine kingship undeniably flourished. In the heart of Kush, power was not solely masculine. It was crowned by the authority of the Kandakes, the Queen Mothers. These matriarchs were not passive consorts, but full sovereigns, warriors, and priestesses who frequently led their armies and negotiated with empires, including the mighty Roman Empire. History has silenced them, but their names, such as Amon-Irenas and Amanishakheto, resonate with the strength of a sacred matriarchy. The mystery surrounding the Kandakes lies in their dual crown, the political and the spiritual. They were seen not only as heads of state, but as the earthly manifestation of a mother goddess, the very representation of fertility and sovereignty of the kingdom. This absolute feminine power is a forbidden revelation, as it challenges the patriarchal narrative that has dominated Western historiography on the ancient world. The symbolic journey of a Kandake began with rituals that connected her directly to the ancestors and female deities of the land. They wore massive jewelry and garments that symbolized the mineral wealth of Kush and its celestial authority, a visual testament to the fact that magic and governance were inseparable and inherent in the strength of the African woman. This spiritual unfolding finds its ultimate expression in the veneration of the goddess Isis in Egypt. The figure of Kandake, the powerful and magical Queen Mother of Kush, is the seed, the matrix from which the Egyptian goddess of the throne and magic, the great sorceress, blossomed. It is a forbidden connection that demonstrates the precedence of the matriarchal power of the South over the traditions of the North. Therefore, in uncovering the history of the Kandakes, we are not only recovering a lost chapter of African history, but understanding the true origin of divine feminine power. They are the hook for the next revelation, showing that Egyptian magic and the throne owe an immense debt to the unwavering legacy of the Queen Mothers of Kush. There is a period in history that Kemet prefers to forget, an era in which the glory of Egypt was restored, not by a native of the Delta, but by a king from the south, Pharaoh Pai, leader of the 25th dynasty, the so-called Black Pharaohs. Pai, a devout Kushite king, saw Egypt decline into conflict and heresy and, moved by a spiritual calling, marched north not as an invader, but as a savior of the ancestral faith. The mystery surrounding Pai is his pretext for unification. His army was not composed merely of warriors, it was a military pilgrimage. Before each battle, Pai performed sacred rituals, reaffirming that his mission was to purify Kemet and restore the worship of the god Ammonius in its original, pure, and uncorrupted form. This revelation is shocking. The foreigners were, in fact, the guardians of Egyptian religious orthodoxy. The symbolic journey of this dynasty is one of a return to origins. Pai and his successors not only ruled, they resurrected the art, architecture, and sacred texts of Egypt's old golden age. They built more pyramids than many native pharaohs, demonstrating that Egypt's true wisdom and spiritual authority resided in the African heartland, in Kush. The spiritual unfolding of this dynasty is proof that the lineage of priest-kings of the south possessed the deepest knowledge of divine governance and the connection with Ammonius. They were the bearers of the sacred spark that had been extinguished in the north. Nubian blood was, at that moment, the vehicle of the most authentic spirituality in Egypt. The history of the 25th dynasty is a silenced conflict, a secret that destabilizes the narrative of northern superiority. And it is this secret, this brief but powerful restoration of African authority over Egypt, that serves as our hook for the next topic, where we will unravel the depth of this connection with the dark stone and eternity. Observe the statues of Nubian pharaohs and Kushite kings. You will notice a striking preference for dark stone, for black granite and diorite, in contrast to the lighter limestone of other Egyptian periods. This is not a mere aesthetic whim. It is a profound declaration of spiritual authority and a quest for eternity. The mystery of the dark stone lies in its symbolism. For the ancients, black represented the fertility of the Nile soil, Kemet, the primordial clay of creation. By sculpting their leaders in black stone, the Kushites sought to align them not only with physical strength, but with the very regenerative power of the earth and with eternal rebirth, the cycle that overcomes death. The sculptor's symbolic journey was one of ritual. Each hammer blow on the dark granite was not merely art. It was the transfer of the essence of the sacred ground into the image of the sovereign. This hardness, which resists time and erosion, ensured that the Ka, the life force, of the king would endure, immune to oblivion and the distortion of history. The spiritual unfolding of this material is a forbidden connection with the deity Osiris, the god of resurrection, often depicted with green or black skin. Thus, kings sculpted in dark stone became living manifestations of Osiris, promising prosperity and the continuity of the royal lineage, merging politics with the divine cycle. By analyzing the preference for dark rock, we see an ancestral secret. True authority did not come from gold or the surface, but from the depth and resilience of Mother Africa. And it is this insistence on eternity and the power of the soil that prepares us for the next revelation, delving into Kemet's greatest treasure, the god Amun. If the temple of Karnak in Egypt is the voice of Ammonius' glory, then the temple of Jebel Barkal in Nubia is his silenced heart. Jebel Barkal, a sacred mountain that the Kushites believed to be the original abode of Ammonius, served as the most important pilgrimage center for centuries. It rivaled Karnak in importance and grandeur, being the point of origin from which the god's spiritual authority radiated along the Nile. The mystery of Jebel Barkal lies not in its construction, but in its mythical authority. Kushite kings were crowned there, not only by men, but by Ammonius himself, who manifested himself through the mountain's rock formation, conferring a divine legitimacy older and more unquestionable than that obtained in Egypt. This revelation challenges the narrative that Egypt held a monopoly on faith in Ammonius. The symbolic journey around Jebel Barkal was a ritual of rebirth and power. The Black Pharaohs, when marching north, as Pai, first went to Barkal to receive the blessing and strength of the sacred mountain, reaffirming that the true lineage of Ammonius was rooted in the south. The mountain was the 0 point, the source of divinity. Spiritual development reveals that the Nubian Amun was a more primordial force, linked to the sun god. He was not merely an Egyptian deity, but the universal god, who ruled over the entirety of African creation, a broader and less politicized concept than the one that developed in the Delta. Therefore, Jebel Barkal is the architectural secret that history has tried to bury. The existence of this colossal temple reminds us that Egyptian faith, at its peak, looked to the south for its origin and purification. And it is this duality between Karnak and Barkal that prepares us to understand the next revelation, the true meaning behind the Star of Isis and the Dogon people. In the vast landscapes of Mali lives the Dogon people, guardians of an astronomical knowledge that defies official chronology. Their ancestral traditions speak openly of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, long before the West identified it with modern telescopes. This is not merely a scientific fact. It is a testament to an African wisdom that mapped the cosmos with mystical precision. The central mystery is the forbidden connection between Dogon knowledge and the goddess Isis. In Egypt, Isis was identified with the star Sopdet, Sirius, whose heliacal rising heralded the Nile's flooding and the rebirth of the earth. This same Sirius is central to Dogon cosmogony, where it is the center of a complex system of myths about the origin and creation of life. The Dogon's symbolic journey to observe Sirius is a ritual connection with the Namo, the ancestral amphibious beings who are said to have brought knowledge of the star. This knowledge, transmitted orally and ritually, suggests that the Egyptian cult of Sopdet/Isis did not originate in the Nile, but was a cultural borrowing from older African stellar traditions, preserved intact in the interior of the continent. The spiritual unfolding of this revelation is profound. The belief system that gave rise to the goddess of magic, Isis, is anchored in astronomical knowledge that predates dynastic Egypt. The Dogon people preserved the celestial map that Kemet used to govern and predict the future, proving that the source of magic and prophecy was in Black Africa. Therefore, when we look at the star Sirius, we are not just seeing a bright star, but evidence of a forbidden connection. It is the secret code that unites the desert of Mali with the Nile, linking Dogon wisdom to the cult of Isis, and prepares us for the next revelation, the symbolism behind the white crown of Upper Egypt. In Egyptian iconography, the hedjet, or white crown, is the primary symbol of Upper Egypt, the south, and, consequently, of original authority over the land. This tall, conical crown, often seen as a mere badge of power, holds a profound visual mystery. Its undeniable resemblance to the white, conical fabric turbans traditionally worn by Nubian and Sudanese leaders and warriors. The mystery lies in the symbolic appropriation. The white crown, before being an Egyptian ceremonial object, was the visual and spiritual status quo of the leaders who ruled the Upper Nile. By adopting or absorbing this design, northern Egypt was not merely annexing territory, it was assimilating the visual power and authority that came directly from the dress and leadership traditions of deep Africa. The symbolic journey from turban to crown is a lesson in the transfer of power. In Nubia, the turban was not merely an accessory, but a sign of status, protection, and spiritual connection, guarding the head, the center of the soul. When this form migrated to become the white crown, it carried with it the weight of ancestral sovereignty, the royalty that was first born in the mountains and savannas. The spiritual unfolding shows that the south, Upper Egypt, was the source of legitimacy for the north, Lower Egypt. For any pharaoh to be considered the legitimate lord of the two lands, he needed to bear the symbol that echoed the original source of the Nile. Power did not rise only with the waters, it rose with the fashion and mystique of the kings of the south. This visual comparison, often ignored by official history, is a subtle but powerful hook. It forces us to recognize that even the most iconic symbols of Egypt have roots in the aesthetics and authority of Black Africa. And it is this connection to the vital element, the river, that leads us to the next revelation about the Nile. The Nile is not just a river, it is the ancestral vein that pumps life and knowledge from deep within Africa to Egypt, the silent witness to all the history the world has forgotten. It rises in the mountains and forests, bringing with it not only the fertile silt that nourishes the delta, but also the traditions, the gods, and the blood of the south. If Egypt is the body, the Nile is the soul that comes from Kush. The mystery of water lies in its uninterrupted flow and its symbolism. The Nile is the personification of the god Hapi, the force of the flood and fertility. Egypt's dependence on the annual flood, which came from the south, conferred upon Nubia a spiritual and existential authority over Kemet. The north literally lived off the generosity and water wisdom of the south. The symbolic journey that water undertakes, from Lake Victoria to the Mediterranean, is a metaphor for cultural migration. Each drop that irrigated the Egyptian fields carried the spirit of the ancestors, the rituals and knowledge that first flourished upstream. The flow of water was not merely geographical, but a continuous transmission of civilization. The spiritual unfolding shows that the Nile is the unbreakable bond, the forbidden connection that history has tried to sever. One cannot speak of Egyptian mythology without revering the origin of the waters, for the very notion of rebirth and the cycle of life was linked to the flood that came from Mother Africa, a power that Egypt could not control, only honor. Therefore, by feeling the power of the Nile, we realize that the river is the great secret. It reminds us that the source is always more important than the destination, and that the life of Kemet was sustained by the vital breath of the south. And it is this fundamental connection with fertility and rebirth that guides us to the next mystery, the rock paintings of the Sahara. Before the desert swallowed vast lands, the Sahara was green, a fertile melting pot where life teemed. The rock walls of Tassili Eniger and other regions hold an ancient secret, cave paintings depicting cattle, rain rituals, and dancing figures with horns. These pre-dynastic murals, dating back thousands of years before Egypt unified, are evidence of a rich and spiritually sophisticated pastoral culture that migrated towards the Nile. The mystery of these paintings is that they reveal the original matrix of cults that Egypt would later adopt. The cow, for example, central to these pastoral scenes, is the root of the cult of the goddess Hathor, the goddess of love, motherhood, and the sky. Cattle were not only wealth but a sacred animal, the vehicle of the gods, showing that celestial veneration began in the pastoral rituals of the Green Sahara. The symbolic journey is that of the inner diaspora. With desertification, these ancestral peoples migrated to the Nile Valley, taking with them their gods, their rituals, and their knowledge of the cosmos. It is this migration that injected vital force and animal symbolism into Egyptian prehistory, marking the transition from a local cult to a complex national mythology. The spiritual unfolding here is the revelation that the most beloved Egyptian gods have roots in the lifestyle and faith of the Saharan people. The figure of Hathor, the celestial cow, is proof that the most tender spirituality of Kemet owes a deep debt to African pastoral practices, where the connection between the sky, cattle, and sacred femininity was absolute. Therefore, the cave paintings are more than art, they are a forgotten map, a link connecting the fertile Sahara to the Nile, proving that the complexity of Egyptian mythology arose from an ancestral African foundation. And it is this foundation that leads us to the next secret, the philosophical concept that governs everything, Ma'at. Before the grand temples, even before Ra had his solar crown defined, there was the fundamental concept that sustained the African universe, Ma'at. This is not a goddess, but rather the cosmic principle of truth, justice, order, and balance. Ma'at was the invisible force that ensured the sun rose, the river flowed, and the government was just. Her ostrich feather, light and inflexible, was the weight of all creation. The mystery here is that Ma'at is the philosophical precursor, the law that precedes the legislator. Ra, the sun god, is in fact the manifestation and active executor of Ma'at in the physical world. The essence of Egyptian power, the justification for the pharaoh's rule, lay not in military might, but in unwavering adherence to this cosmic order, an ancestral wisdom that already existed in previous Nilotic cultures. The symbolic journey of Ma'at is that of universal ethics. The most important rituals of the pharaoh were performed not to please a god, but to give Ma'at to Ra, that is, to restore balance and truth in the cosmos. This journey of maintaining order is the forbidden revelation that Egyptian civilization was governed by a moral and ethical code from Africa, deeper than any individual deity. The spiritual unfolding of Ma'at is that she resonates in countless African belief systems, where social order and morality are governed by a divine principle of harmony with nature. She is wisdom that has not been erased, but codified. It is proof that African spirituality has always prioritized universal balance above all else. Ma'at, therefore, is the silent force behind Ra, the hook that connects divine justice to sunlight. She reminds us that, to understand the gods, one must first understand the law that governs them, and this law originates in the depths of ancestral African philosophy. And it is this order that leads us to the next guardian of the mystery, Wepwawet. Before the famous Anubis, the jackal who weighs the hearts of the dead, took center stage in eternity, there existed an older deity, originating from the south, Wepwawet, the opener of paths. This ancestral figure, often depicted as a dark-colored wolf or jackal, was not primarily linked to death and mummification, but rather to journeys, exploration, and military victory, acting as a protective guide for kings. The mystery surrounding Wepwawet lies in his dual role. He was both the pharaoh's guide in war and the conductor of souls in the spiritual world. This duality reveals a forbidden truth, that the jackal in African cosmogony was seen as a powerful explorer, an intermediary between the known and the unknown, and not merely a funerary guardian. The symbolic journey of Wepwawet is the missing link between the warrior tradition of the south and the priestly office of the north. When unified Egypt embraced the figure of the jackal, Wepwawet was slowly assimilated by Anubis, who took center stage in death and rituals. However, the jackal of the south maintained its importance, always marching ahead of the royal standards, ensuring that the path was clear of obstacles. The spiritual unfolding of this archetype proves that the idea of a canine guide for the king and for the soul was not born in tombs, but on expedition routes and in the battles of the south. Wepwawet is the personification of courage and leadership, an ancestral knowledge that the figure of Anubis only partially preserved. Thus, by unveiling the figure of Wepwawet, we understand that Anubis is a powerful descendant, but not the source. The true opener of paths is a secret of the South. And it is this connection with the soul and the passage that leads us to the next mystery, about the origin of the goddess of magic and feminine power, Isis. If the Kandake of Kush, Topic 3, was the earthly sovereign, The primordial source of her power was the deeply rooted belief in the ancestral mother. In vast regions of pre-dynastic Africa, the feminine principle was revered as the guardian of the lineage, the holder of healing wisdom, and the origin of life itself. This veneration is the sacred ground from which the goddess Isis, the divine mother of Egypt, sprang. The mystery lies not in the existence of Isis, but in the anteriority of the ancestral mother. African legends and rituals speak of primordial female figures who established the law, taught magic, and ensured the fertility of the clan, long before Egypt formalized its pantheon. This is the forbidden revelation. The matrix of magic and female sovereignty of Kemet is not Egyptian, but Pan-African. The symbolic journey of Isis is one of codification. Egypt took the diffuse archetype of the African ancestral mother, the force that transcends death to resurrect life and knowledge, and gave her a name, a throne, and a complex myth, Osiris. However, the essence of her healing and magical power remained linked to the matriarchal tradition of the South. The spiritual unfolding shows that the power of Isis, the great magician who deceived Ra and resurrected Osiris, is the condensation of the wisdom of thousands of African matriarchs, the true bearers of vital force. It is an ode to feminine power that remained unshaken, even as society became more patriarchal. Therefore, Isis is the secret link, a hook that reminds us that the most powerful female deity in Egypt has its roots in an ancestral respect for women. This matriarchal origin leads us directly to the next mystery, the symbol that Isis and all of Egypt brandished, the Ankh. The Ankh, or Ansate cross, is the most recognizable Egyptian symbol of eternal life, often held by gods and offered to kings. However, its elegant form and profound meaning conceal a more universal origin and a forbidden connection. The Ankh is the coded echo of the tree of life and fertility symbols found in older African cultures. The mystery of the Ankh lies in its morphology. The upper loop, the circle, represents the sun or femininity, the vertical shaft, masculine strength, and the crossbar, the horizon. Together, they form the key to union and the cycle of existence. This representation of life as a union of opposites and as a tree-like structure linking heaven and earth is common in ancestral African symbolism, of which the Ankh is the synthesis. The symbolic journey of the Ankh is that of the permanence of knowledge. Where other cultures used sacred trees, plants, or fertility rituals to represent the continuity of life, Egypt created a perfect hieroglyph. The Ankh became the guardian of this knowledge, the promise of rebirth that transcended the barriers of time and oblivion. The spiritual unfolding of this symbol is a forbidden revelation. The key of life of Egypt is not an isolated invention, but the formalization of a Pan-African spiritual concept. It demonstrates the priority of African spirituality in the search for the continuity of existence and the union of cosmic principles, a wisdom that spread through trade routes and belief systems. The Ankh, therefore, is living proof that Egypt is a cultural bridge, not an island. It is the hook that connects the traditions of eternal life from the interior of Africa to the Nile Valley, and prepares us for the next revelation, plunging us into the primordial source of the sun god, Ra. Ra, the Egyptian sun god, is the light, the power, and the very foundation of pharaonic royalty. However, his cult has even deeper and less recognized roots in Africa. The cosmogony of the Dogon people, for example, venerates Amun, the primordial creator god, who shaped the universe from nothing. The revelation is that the cult of Ra is not the beginning, but rather a secondary and focused manifestation of a broader and older solar faith. The mystery lies in the transition. How does an abstract and universal creator god like Amun transform into the personified sun god Ra? It is believed that, as ancestral peoples migrated to the Nile, the emphasis on the supreme creator, Amun, linked to the concept of cosmic order, was directed towards its most visible and vital aspect. The sun. Egypt channeled the force of the primordial creator into the regal and everyday form of Ra. The symbolic journey of the sun, from Amun to Ra, is the journey of African faith to the Nile civilization. The solar cult, central to life in the savanna and desert, where the sun is the dividing line between life and death, carried with it the weight of total creation. Ra, therefore, inherited Amma's authority as the source of all life and order. The spiritual unfolding of this connection proves that Egyptian theology drew from more ancient and philosophically complex African sources. Egypt gave Amma a name and a solar boat, but the essence of her authority as the source of all resides in Dogon wisdom and beliefs in a single, creator god, which predate the Egyptian pantheon. The worship of Ra, when viewed through the lens of Amma and Dogon cosmogony, is no longer an isolated mystery, but a hook for a larger revelation, that the most sophisticated spiritual knowledge of East Africa was adapted and used to forge the Egyptian empire. And it is this adaptation that leads us to the next controversy, regarding the true location of power. Official history, often told through European eyes, tends to place Egypt on the Mediterranean axis, ignoring or minimizing its undeniably African roots. But the truth, whispered by the desert winds and the Nile floods, is that Kemet was, in its essence, a southern civilization whose spiritual and ethnic heart was deeply connected to Nubia and the interior of the continent, much more so than to the northern cultures. The mystery here is the geographical distortion. Life, agriculture, royal authority, the white crown, and religion, Ammonius, arrived in the delta, the north, driven from the south. Upper Egypt, the geographical south, always maintained the oldest and purest tradition. The emphasis on the Mediterranean served to create a narrative of separation, a forbidden revelation that attempted to isolate Egypt from its African origins. The symbolic journey of Egypt, when viewed correctly, is an ascent from south to north. Each pharaoh who unified the land was, in practice, bringing the order and wisdom of the African interior to the delta. This is the true cultural matrix of the empire, where rituals, the art of mummification, and the belief in the afterlife had their strongest echoes in Nilotic traditions. The spiritual unfolding of this recognition is the recovery of identity. Accepting Egypt as a predominantly southern civilization is to restore the historical dignity and cultural authority of Black Africa. It is to understand that the sophistication of Egyptian philosophy and science did not come from the sea, but from the cradle of the Nile. Therefore, Egypt's secret lies not in its maritime connections, but in its deep terrestrial roots, a hook that compels us to confront the next mystery, the process of cultural erasure that followed the arrival of other powers. The glory of Egypt did not end with the pharaohs. It was absorbed, but not without losses. With the arrival of Alexander the Great, and later the Roman Empire, an insidious process of Hellenization and Romanization began. The sacred names, ancestral rituals, and African identities of the gods were subjected to a cultural translation that resulted in a forced silence about their origins. The mystery lies in the intention behind this erasure. It was not merely a linguistic translation, but a political rewriting. The god Amun became Zeus-Amun. Isis, the universal mother, was adapted to be venerated in Greek temples. This fusion had a forbidden purpose: to make the African gods more palatable and less threatening to the new conquerors, severing their direct link with Black Africa. The symbolic journey of the gods is, therefore, that of a mask. They donned Greco-Roman garb, but the power and knowledge that gave them authority remained, secretly, in their African roots. The cult of Isis, for example, became one of the most popular in the Roman Empire, but few realized that they were worshipping a matriarchal principle originating from the heart of Africa. The spiritual unfolding of this process is a reminder: the persecution and distortion of names and myths are the first tools used to dominate a people. By erasing the original name, the memory of the source and cultural authority are erased. It is an ancestral wisdom that teaches us to value the truth behind the translation. This erasure, however, failed to extinguish the legacy. It is the hook that allows us to look beyond the Greek statues and recognize the African face beneath the marble. And this persistence of the myth leads us to the next secret: the true origin of Egypt's most famous legend, Osiris. The myth of Osiris, the murdered and resurrected god, is the backbone of Egyptian faith, the promise of life after death and the model for eternal kingship. However, this colossal legend is not an invention isolated to Egypt. It is the sublime and codified reflection of older African agricultural cycles, where the death and rebirth of vegetation were annual rituals. The mystery surrounding Osiris lies in its pre-mythological function. Before becoming a real drama between brothers, Osiris and Set, the story was the personification of nature, the seed that dies in the soil to be reborn as a harvest, the Nile that recedes to return in flood. This revelation prohibits viewing the myth solely as a divine event. It is the transposition of agrarian knowledge and ancestral wisdom about the cycle of life. The symbolic journey of Osiris, from death to resurrection, mirrors the Pan-African belief that death is not an end, but a transformation, a return to Mother Earth to generate new life. The mummification rituals and mourning of Isis are, in essence, the dramatization of planting and waiting for the return of fertility, a wisdom that ensured the survival of African communities for millennia. The spiritual unfolding shows that the core of the Egyptian myth is the fundamental law of African nature, regeneration. By linking the pharaoh's eternity to the cycle of Osiris, Egypt was, in fact, anchoring its faith in an agrarian and spiritual knowledge coming from Nilotic cultures, which venerated the earth as the vehicle of rebirth. Therefore, the secret of Osiris lies in fertile clay. It is the hook that connects Egyptian cosmogony to the planting rituals of deep Africa, reminding us that the divine and the agricultural have always been intertwined. And it is this connection with the sky and time that leads us to the next revelation, the origin of Egyptian astrology. There is a more recent and more painful secret that hangs over the entire story we have just uncovered. It concerns the academic bias and historical racism that deliberately work to minimize and, in many cases, erase the influence of Nubia and Black Africa on Egypt. The Eurocentric narrative of the past could not tolerate that the greatest brilliance of ancient civilization came from the interior of the African continent. The mystery is not Egypt itself, but the denial of its roots. From the 19th century onwards, with the height of colonialism, the need to justify domination resulted in a rewriting of history, where Egypt was whitewashed and disassociated from Africa. This is the forbidden revelation. The historical distortion was not a mistake, but a political and ideological tool to steal the cultural authority of Mother Africa. The symbolic journey of forgetting is that of forced silence in textbooks. Archaeological discoveries that proved the military superiority and antiquity of the Kushite royalty were systematically underestimated or marginalized, transforming Black kings and queens into mere imitators of Egypt, when in fact, they were the original source of its power and faith. The spiritual unfolding of this distortion is the direct impact on modern identity. The denial of Egypt's African roots is an assault on the self-esteem and history of the diaspora and the continent, which now struggles to reclaim its legacy. The truth about Kush and Kemet is, therefore, a matter of historical and spiritual justice. By revealing these influences, we are not only correcting dates and names, but dismantling the last and most persistent secret. The sand may have covered the temples, and books may have rewritten the names, but the spirit of Mother Africa is immortal. We have just unveiled the deepest truth of the Nile, that the glory of Kemet, the magic of Isis, and the power of Ra, all have their source in the ancient wisdom of Kush, of Meroë, and of the peoples of the south who carried the sun in their souls. The story is not over. It has only begun to be told again. Each Nubian statue, each Dogon rite, each concept of Ma'at that has survived distortion is a beacon of light guiding us to a forgotten past, a legacy that is the foundation of all humanity and much of modern faith. May the echo of these sacred revelations resonate in your soul, awakening respect and admiration for the ancestral authority that was silenced but never destroyed. Knowledge is free. Don't let the flame go out. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next revelation. There are many other mysteries of hidden Africa that still sleep beneath the sands of time, waiting to be whispered to the world.